Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, of course. Today I've come on YouTube because I would like to show you guys a few unique fossils here, not commonly found. One of them's a cast, the rest are all real. And I'm going to show you the most interesting one first, and it's the cast, because it's not easy to come across, especially in mint condition. But this, of course, as you all may know, saber-toothed cats are my favorite of the extinct group of animals that existed between, the beginning and end of the Pleistocene, although saber-toothed cats had been evolving for quite some time before the Pleistocene. But here we have a tooth of the most famous saber-toothed cat of all, Smilodon fatalis. Now, Smilodon fatalis, I don't know if you can see the details of that one very well, but it's a nos cast. It's even got the serrations along the edge of the tooth. Smilodon fatalis had a teeth that could be upwards of 8 inches long. So this isn't even the longest that they could get. Now 8 inches, that's fairly long. Smilodon was a specialized large herbivore hunter. They specialized in hunting animals, big animals like buffalo. Toxodon was another common animal found that they would hunt. And their teeth were serrated on both sides, making them extremely sharp. However, they would have been fragile on the horizontal axis. They would have been quite weak. As you can see, they were quite thin. They weren't the strongest of teeth as far as, strength went. If it were to bite into an animal, it would get its tooth in the large muscle. They would have even been able to separate vertebrae from one another. However, the Smilodon would not have been able to rip and tear at flesh as other cats of today can. They would have needed to, probably scientists speculate, would have needed to use their back incisor teeth, which are scissor-like, to shear off chunks of flesh, because these just simply would not have done the job. They were good at stabbing and cutting, but they would have broken almost certainly by ripping at flesh. So that is the most interesting one that I have yet. It's fairly nice, and the rest of the fossils I'm going to show you are all real. Okay. The next one I'm going to show you is this. Now this may look a bit awkward or weird. This, however, is a sheath from Smilodon again. This would have been from the claw. Now this would have been hugged up against, you see, their bone or their knuckle would have been shaped somewhat like that, and their claw would have been in there like that. Now this was not the actual claw itself, it was the sheath. There would have been an actual, keratin area coming right out. Their claws were made of keratin, very strong actually. Would have been sheathed up in there, and then they could have deployed it in killing, and their claws themselves were quite long as well. They were very sharp. If you look at an actual cat's claw of today, you see how they have that very thin skin-like sheath. If you look at the end of their claw, nearest the paw, they have that very thin membrane of skin. Well, that membrane of skin is equivalent to what this here is. And then their claw fits nicely into that and keeps them sharp when they're walking around, or because cats need sharp claws. Now the good thing about keratin is that when an outer layer gets dull, they can simply shed it. That's it. It's real simple. They can shed their outer layer of keratin. It reveals a fresher inner layer which is sharper, and that will stay on for 2 or 3 months, and then they shed another one. My cat always leaves, the outside of her claws laying all over the place. Sometimes when she scratches me, she'll leave bits of her claw inside me. Okay, what else? Here's a fossil, really nice. It's a trilobite. It's been carbon dated to close to 450 million years old, and it was found in the Burgess Shale Formation in Field, British Columbia. Trilobites were very abundant, which is why you can find them in almost every fossil shop, which are not that common anymore. They used to be. But this particular trilobite, I've actually looked at it under a microscope, and its eyes still have lenses that can be seen. Each individual lens has been preserved on a microscopic level, so you can take it and look under it. Look at it under a microscope and still be able to see the individual lenses on the eyes. These were segmented arthropods. They were descendant of today's insects. In fact, if you look around in some museums, they have exhibits where they have, certain types of beetle or certain types of cockroach that look identical to these. Some of them even have the long wispy antennae that go down along the sides of their body, along these segments. Now these bony segments would have helped protect the trilobite as it moved along the ocean floor from predators such as Anomalocaris. 450 million years ago, however, Anomalocaris was not the biggest of its problems because it was likely extinct by that point. 450 million years ago would have dawned the Ordovician. By then you would have had sea scorpions, you would have had early cephalopods like early squid, early orthocones or orthoceras, things like that. So these guys had more predators to watch out for. Most of them were subject to predation. This individual is actually missing the end section or end segment of its body. The rest of it is very nicely preserved. The next fossils we're going to show you are all of the same group. They come from a group called brachiopods, but they're from different locations and from different times. This is the nicest one yet. This is obviously a bivalve. It was found in the, what is it called? It's an Eocene rock formation found just outside Red Deer, Alberta. And in that area it would have been from the early Eocene, because in the early Eocene there was an inland sea not stretching quite as far from Red Deer, because that was pretty far inland by that point. However, the sea at one point did extend, so likely this was just exposed from earlier rock formations, and that is where I found it. Nothing too interesting about it. It's a bivalve just like anyone you find today. The next thing we have here is the umbo, or the area of greatest curvature, is it? There's an actual term for the umbo. It's pretty much just the hinge of what was once a giant oyster. Because, as you can see, it was very, very thick, and there are several layers in here. I believe I counted 16 layers. So there's 16 layers in this, and on the inner section of it, there is still even fragments of the mother of pearl that would have covered the inside of this. Now that is a fairly nice specimen. The next one we have here is a whole block of rock here. It's a big block of sandstone, and in it are hundreds upon hundreds of fragments of shells. This came from a much larger shell bed found in the Midland Formation in Drumheller, obviously known as one of the biggest paleontological headquarters in the world. It was very large. The shell bed that I found this in came from an area where they've also found a few specimens of marine reptile. Marine reptile were a very interesting group of reptiles that lived in the seas. I'm sure you've all heard of them. My personal favorite would have been tylosaurs. They were very powerful, very strong, and these shells would have lived they wouldn't have lived out in the ocean where they were found. They would have been found more in the shallows, or even on the shore, buried in the sand. When high tide came in, they lived typically in there. When then high tide came in, they would filter feed then. However, it's still interesting to think that most of these lived in the seas with some of the most deadly animals to ever have lived on this planet. Well, that concludes my video for today. Leave a comment in the comment box below. Please be nice. And have yourselves a good evening.